Walk through Tarragona today, and you're in a coastal city of 135,000 people on Spain's Mediterranean shore. Tourists photograph the beaches. Cruise ships dock in the modern port. The old town is charming, with medieval streets and a Gothic cathedral, but stand on the headland overlooking the sea, where that cathedral now rises, and you're standing on the site of one of Rome's most important provincial capitals, Tarraco, the oldest Roman city on the Iberian Peninsula. Capital of Hispania Tarraconensis, the largest Roman province in Spain, stretching from the Pyrenees to the Atlantic. A city where emperors wintered, where provincial governors ruled, where perhaps 30,000 to 40,000 people lived at its peak in the 2nd century AD, and then it vanished. Not all at once, but slowly, systematically, until almost nothing remained. The amphitheater still stands by the sea. Sections of Roman wall survive. A few columns mark where a forum once stood. But the vast metropolis that was Rome's gateway to Iberia is almost entirely gone. This is the story of what Tarraco was, and what happened to it when Rome fell. Founding and strategic importance. To understand Tarraco's importance, you must understand why Rome built a city here. In 218 BC, during the Second Punic War against Carthage, the Roman general Gnaeus Cornelius Scipio Calvus established a military base on the Spanish coast. The location was strategic: a natural harbor, a defensive headland, and access to the interior of Iberia. This base, called Tarraco, became Rome's first permanent settlement on the Iberian Peninsula. The city's importance grew rapidly. After Rome defeated Carthage and established control over Hispania, Tarraco became the administrative center for Roman operations in Spain. By 27 BC, when Emperor Augustus reorganized the Roman provinces, Tarraco was designated the capital of Hispania Tarraconensis. This province was enormous, roughly 2/3 of the Iberian Peninsula, stretching from the Pyrenees Mountains in the northeast to Galicia in the northwest, encompassing most of modern Spain. Governing such a vast territory required a substantial administrative apparatus, and Tarraco was the center. Augustus himself wintered in Tarraco from 27 to 25 BC, overseeing the final Cantabrian Wars that completed the Roman conquest of Iberia. During his stay, he held court, received embassies from across the empire, and transformed the city. It was during this period that Tarraco received substantial imperial investment in infrastructure and monuments. The city's harbor made it the primary port of entry for Roman officials, soldiers, merchants, and goods coming to Hispania. The Via Augusta, the great Roman road connecting Rome to Cadiz, passed through Tarraco, making it a hub for overland trade as well. Urban layout: 3 terraces. Roman Tarraco was built on a dramatic hillside that rose from the Mediterranean shore. The city's layout reflected both defensive considerations and Roman urban planning principles. Adapted to the challenging terrain, the urban core occupied 3 distinct terraces on the hillside, each with its own function. The lower terrace, closest to the sea, housed the port facilities, warehouses, and commercial district. Here, ships from across the Mediterranean docked to load and unload cargo. Merchants conducted business. Customs officials collected taxes. This area was the economic engine of the city. The middle terrace contained the colonial forum, the civic and commercial center for the Roman settlers and citizens. This forum, built in the 1st century BC, was a rectangular plaza surrounded by porticos, shops, and administrative buildings. It served as the marketplace, gathering place for public assemblies, and center of daily urban life. The upper terrace, occupying the highest point of the city, was the Provincial Forum. This monumental complex, built during Augustus's reign and expanded by his successors, was the administrative heart of the entire province. The Provincial Forum consisted of a vast plaza approximately 175 meters long and 90 meters wide, surrounded by porticos. At one end stood the Temple of Augustus, dedicated to the imperial cult. This temple served as the religious and political center of Roman Hispania, where representatives from cities across the province gathered annually for ceremonies honoring the emperor. Massive retaining walls, some still visible today, supported these terraces. The Romans engineered these walls, known as the Cyclopean Wall, due to their enormous stone blocks to create level platforms on the steep hillside. These engineering works were among the most impressive in the Western Roman Empire. The Circus, a stadium for chariot racing, was built into the hillside between the middle and upper terraces. This structure, approximately 325 meters long and 115 meters wide, could accommodate perhaps 25,000 to 30,000 spectators. It was one of the largest circuses in the Roman world outside of Rome itself. Architecture and monuments. The architecture of Tarraco at its peak reflected the city's status as a major provincial capital. The amphitheater, built in the late 1st or early 2nd century AD, stood dramatically positioned on the shoreline. This elliptical structure, approximately 109 meters long and 86 meters wide, could seat around 14,000 spectators. It was partially excavated into the hillside for the seating area, with the rest constructed of stone and brick. Here, gladiatorial combats, animal hunts, and public executions entertained the population. The Provincial Forum complex dominated the upper city. The Temple of Augustus stood on a high podium at the eastern end of the Forum Plaza. Built in the early 1st century AD, it followed the classic Roman temple design, a rectangular structure with columns on the front portico and a cella inner chamber housing the cult statue. The temple was built of local limestone, with decorative elements and imported marble. Surrounding the Forum Plaza were porticos covered walkways with columns supporting roofs. These porticos provided shelter from sun and rain and were lined with administrative buildings, shrines, and spaces for various activities. The Forum was not just a single building, but a complex urban space designed to impress visitors with the power and sophistication of Rome. Aqueducts brought water from sources in the surrounding hills. The most impressive was the Ponte del Diablo Devil's Bridge, a two-tiered aqueduct that carried water approximately 217 meters across a valley. Standing 27 meters high, this structure still survives today. The aqueduct system supplied public fountains, baths, private homes of the wealthy, and industries requiring water. Public baths were essential to Roman urban life. While the exact number and locations of all bath complexes in Tarraco are not fully known, archaeological evidence confirms the existence of multiple bathing establishments. These provided hygiene, exercise, and socialization for the population. Walls fortified the city. The oldest sections date to the 3rd century BC and were built using massive polygonal stones. Later walls, constructed and modified over centuries, enclosed the urban core and protected the city from attack. The theater, built into the slope of the hill in the 1st century BC, provided entertainment in the form of dramatic performances, musical recitals, and poetry readings. Its exact capacity is uncertain, but it likely accommodated several thousand spectators. Population and social structure. At its peak in the 1st and 2nd centuries AD, Tarraco's population is estimated at 30,000 to 40,000 inhabitants, making it one of the larger cities in the Western Roman Empire. The population was stratified according to Roman legal and social categories. At the apex stood the provincial governor, who resided in Tarraco and governed Hispania Tarraconensis on behalf of the emperor. The governor commanded military forces, administered justice, collected taxes, and supervised the infrastructure of the province. He was typically a senator appointed by the emperor for a term of several years. Below the governor were the provincial administrative officials, financial officers, military commanders, legal advisors, and clerks who managed the bureaucracy. These were Roman citizens, often from Italy, or Romanized families from the provinces. The local aristocracy, wealthy landowners, merchants, and retired military officers who held Roman citizenship formed the city council curia. These decuriones councilors managed local affairs, funded public works, and competed for honors and prestige through benefactions to the city. Roman citizens, whether born in Tarraco or immigrants from elsewhere in the empire, enjoyed full legal rights. They could vote, though local elections were the main political participation, own property, make contracts, and appeal to Roman law. Below citizens in status were Latini inhabitants who held Latin rights, which gave them some legal protections and the possibility of becoming full citizens through holding local office or military service. Peregrini-free non-citizens formed a significant portion of the population. These were indigenous Iberians, Greeks, North Africans, and others who had migrated to Tarraco for economic opportunity. They had limited legal rights but could conduct business and own property. Freedmen, former slaves who had been manumitted, occupied an intermediate status. Though legally free, they often continued working for their former masters and faced social restrictions. Slaves formed the bottom of the social hierarchy. They worked in households, workshops, construction projects, and agricultural estates. The number of slaves in Tarraco is impossible to determine precisely, but slavery was fundamental to the Roman economy, daily life and occupations. Daily life in Roman Tarraco followed rhythms common across the empire, but adapted to local conditions. Most people woke at dawn. The day began with a simple breakfast: bread dipped in wine or olive oil, perhaps some cheese or fruit. Water came from public fountains supplied by the aqueducts or from wells. For working people, the day meant labor. The port employed thousands of dock workers loading and unloading ships, sailors, customs officials, warehouse clerks. Construction projects throughout the city required laborers, stonecutters, carpenters, and skilled craftsmen. Workshops produced goods for local consumption and export. Potters manufactured ceramics. Blacksmiths forged tools and weapons. Textile workers spun wool and wove cloth. Leather workers produced shoes, belts, and military equipment. Many workshops were small family operations, with a master, a few workers, and perhaps an apprentice or two. Agriculture sustained the city. The surrounding countryside produced grain, wine, olive oil, and vegetables. Estates owned by the urban aristocracy employed agricultural workers, some free laborers, some tenant farmers, some slaves. The main meal cena was eaten in the afternoon. For common people, this meant bread, pottage grain and vegetable porridge, legumes, and occasionally fish or cheap meat. Olive oil and wine were dietary staples. The wealthy ate more elaborately: roasted meats, game, imported delicacies, fine wines, and dishes prepared by enslaved cooks. The afternoon brought leisure for those who could afford it. Public baths opened, providing bathing, exercise in gymnasiums, and socialization. Men and women at separate times or facilities moved through the bathing sequence: undressing room, exercise, warm room tepidarium, hot room caldarium, and cold plunge frigidarium. Entertainment included events at the amphitheater and circus. Gladiatorial games, featuring professional fighters and condemned criminals, drew enormous crowds. Chariot races in the circus attracted passionate fan support, with spectators betting on teams and cheering their favorites. Housing varied by class. The wealthy lived in domus, private houses with multiple rooms arranged around an atrium and peristyle garden. These homes had running water, latrines, decorated floors with mosaics and painted walls. Most people lived in insulae, multi-story apartment blocks. These were cramped, often poorly built, and prone to collapse and fire. Residents rented single rooms or small apartments, sharing communal facilities. Trade and economic power. Tarraco's economy was based on its role as the administrative capital, major port, and commercial hub connecting Hispania to the broader Mediterranean world. The harbor was the economic lifeline. Ships arrived from Italy carrying wine, olive oil, though Hispania also produced these, luxury goods, and manufactured items. They departed laden with Hispanian products, minerals: silver, copper, lead, gold from mines in the interior, grain, wine, olive oil, garum, fermented fish sauce, a Roman delicacy produced along the coast, and slaves. The wine and olive oil produced in the territory around Tarraco were exported throughout the empire. Archaeological evidence: amphora fragments found across the Mediterranean documents the reach of Tarraco's trade networks. Taxation was a major economic activity. As the provincial capital, Tarraco was the center for collecting taxes from across Hispania Tarraconensis. Tax collectors, publicani, gathered revenues that supported the imperial administration, military, and infrastructure. The imperial cult generated economic activity. The annual provincial council, held at the Temple of Augustus, brought delegates from cities across the province. These visitors needed food, lodging, and services, creating a temporary economic boom. Currency circulated freely. The imperial mint at Rome produced coins used throughout the empire, and local mints in Hispania also struck bronze coins for small transactions. Money changers facilitated commerce, and credit systems allowed merchants to conduct long-distance trade without transporting large quantities of coins. The city's position on the Via Augusta meant that overland trade also passed through. Caravans carrying goods between Gaul and southern Hispania stopped in Tarraco, paying tolls and purchasing supplies. Religion from pagan to Christian religion in Tarraco evolved dramatically between the 1st and 7th centuries AD. In the 1st and 2nd centuries, Roman Tarraco was thoroughly pagan. The imperial cult was the most important official religion. The Temple of Augustus served as the center of emperor worship, where provincial representatives gathered annually to honor the emperor and renew loyalty to Rome. A priest, elected from the provincial aristocracy, presided over these ceremonies. Traditional Roman gods were worshipped in temples throughout the city. Jupiter, Juno, Minerva, the Capitoline triad, received official veneration. Mars, god of war, was important in this military-focused society. Neptune, god of the sea, was natural for a port city. Local Iberian deities were syncretized with Roman gods. Indigenous religious practices continued but were increasingly Romanized. Mystery cults from the Eastern Mediterranean attracted followers. Worship of Cybele, Isis, and Mithras is attested archaeologically in Tarraco. These cults offered personal salvation and secret rituals that appealed to some Romans and provincial inhabitants. Christianity reached Tarraco by the 2nd century AD. The Christian community was initially small and faced persecution. In 259 AD, during the persecution under Emperor Valerian, Bishop Fructuosus and 2 deacons, Augurius and Eulogius, were martyred in the amphitheater. They were burned alive for refusing to sacrifice to the emperor. This martyrdom became a foundational event in Tarraco's Christian identity. After Constantine's conversion in the early 4th century and the establishment of Christianity as the empire's favored religion, Tarraco became an important episcopal see. Churches replaced pagan temples. The Christian community grew and organized. By the 5th century, Tarraco was a major center of Hispanic Christianity, hosting church councils and producing influential bishops. A cathedral was built on the site of the former provincial forum, reusing columns and materials from pagan structures. Christian Tarraco emerged from the ruins of pagan Tarraco. Section 8. Decline. The long collapse. Tarraco's decline was gradual, spanning centuries rather than occurring in a single catastrophic event. The crisis of the 3rd century to 35284 AD brought political instability, economic disruption, and military threats to the Roman Empire. Tarraco suffered from the general decline affecting all Roman cities during this period. Trade contracted, tax revenues fell, maintenance of public buildings and infrastructure declined. The city partially recovered in the 4th century under Diocletian and Constantine's reforms. Christian Tarraco grew in importance even as the secular administrative functions diminished, but the 5th century brought catastrophe. In 409 AD, Germanic tribes Vandals, Alans, and Suevi crossed the Pyrenees and invaded Hispania. The Roman military was too weak to expel them. The invaders devastated the countryside, disrupting agriculture and trade. The Visigoths, initially Roman allies, entered Hispania in 415 AD to fight the invaders on Rome's behalf. By the 470s, with the Western Roman Empire collapsing, the Visigoths established their own kingdom in Hispania. Tarraco came under Visigothic control. Visigothic Tarraco was a shadow of Roman Tarraco. The population had declined dramatically, perhaps to 5,000 to 10,000 people. The grand Roman buildings were no longer maintained. The circus fell into disuse. The amphitheater was abandoned. The aqueducts were not maintained and gradually ceased functioning. The economy contracted to local subsistence. Long-distance trade collapsed. The port declined. The city that had once connected Hispania to the Mediterranean world became a provincial backwater. The Visigoths established their capital at Toledo, not Tarraco. The city's political importance evaporated. Tarraco was now just another episcopal see, important religiously, but not politically or economically. The final blow: Muslim conquest. In 711 AD, Muslim armies crossed the Strait of Gibraltar from North Africa and invaded Visigothic Hispania. Within a few years, they conquered most of the Iberian Peninsula. Tarraco fell to the Muslims in 714 AD. The city was renamed Tarragona, but did not recover its former importance. The Muslim rulers established their capital at Circus in the south. Tarragona remained a minor city on the frontier between Muslim and Christian territories. Over the following centuries, Tarraco or Tarragona changed hands multiple times between Muslim and Christian forces. Each conquest brought destruction. Buildings were damaged, populations fled or were enslaved, and infrastructure deteriorated further. The definitive Christian reconquest of Tarragona came in 1117 AD, when Count Ramon Berenguer III of Barcelona captured the city. But what the Christians found was not Roman Tarraco. It was a ruined shell, a few thousand inhabitants living among the ruins of monuments they no longer understood or could maintain. The Roman city was gone. The amphitheater served as a quarry for stone. The circus was buried and forgotten. The provincial forum became a tangle of medieval buildings. The aqueducts stood as mysterious relics of a lost civilization. Medieval and later Tarragona was built on top of, and from the materials of, Roman Tarraco. Each generation cannibalized the structures of the past. Columns became foundation stones for churches. Marble was burned in lime kilns. Massive retaining walls were incorporated into medieval fortifications. Wh80 remains today. Modern Tarragona preserves fragments of Tarraco, but the scale of what was lost is staggering. The amphitheater by the sea survives because it was partially excavated into bedrock and was difficult to completely demolish. The Pont del Diable aqueduct stands because it was a bridge as well as an aqueduct and remained useful. Sections of wall survive, incorporated into medieval and modern structures. But the Provincial Forum, that vast complex that was the administrative heart of Hispania Tarraconensis, is almost entirely gone. A few columns stand in isolation. The cathedral occupies part of the site, built using stones from the Temple of Augustus. The circus is invisible from above ground. Only through excavations have archaeologists mapped its enormous outline beneath the modern city. Buildings and streets now cover what was once Rome's third largest circus. The colonial forum, the port facilities, the baths, the theater, the residential districts all have vanished or survive only as fragments visible in museum excavations. UNESCO designated the archaeological ensemble of Tarraco a World Heritage Site in 2000, recognizing its importance. But even with this recognition, only a tiny fraction of Roman Tarraco can be seen today. The contrast is profound. A city that was once home to 30,000 to 40,000 people, that administered an area the size of modern Spain, that received emperors and housed a provincial government, has almost disappeared. Not through a single catastrophe like Pompeii's volcanic burial, but through the slow erosion of time, conquest, economic collapse, and the recycling of materials by successive generations. Conclusion: the invisible capital. Standing in modern Tarragona, looking at the beaches, the port, the cathedral, and the fragments of Roman walls, it requires historical imagination to see what once stood here. Imagine the provincial forum stretching where the cathedral now stands, 175 meters of colonnaded plaza, with the Temple of Augustus rising at the far end. Imagine 25,000 spectators packed into the circus, cheering chariot teams. Imagine ships from across the Mediterranean docking in the harbor, unloading amphorae of wine and grain. Imagine the provincial governor holding court, administering a territory larger than modern Portugal. Tarraco was not a minor outpost but a major Roman capital, the oldest Roman city on the Iberian Peninsula, the administrative center of Rome's largest Spanish province, a city that shaped the history and culture of Spain for centuries, and then it vanished. Not in fire or earthquake, but through the slow, relentless process of decline that followed Rome's fall. The Visigoths couldn't maintain what Rome had built. The Muslims ruled a different empire with different priorities. Medieval Christians built a new city from the stones of the old. Each generation took what it needed from Tarraco's ruins and left the rest to decay. The aqueducts broke. The temples were demolished. The grand administrative buildings became quarries. The sophisticated urban infrastructure that had sustained 40,000 people disappeared, and the population shrank to a fraction of its former size. Tarraco's story is the story of Roman civilization's collapse in miniature. The power that built cities across 3 continents, that engineered aqueducts and amphitheaters, that created legal systems and trade networks spanning thousands of miles, that power faded, and with it, the cities that power had built. Modern Tarragona thrives as a coastal city, a tourist destination, a place where people live and work. But beneath the streets, buried under buildings and parking lots, lie the foundations of Tarraco, Rome's first capital in Spain, a city that once governed half the Iberian Peninsula and has now almost entirely vanished from the landscape it once dominated. The fragments that remain: the amphitheater, the aqueduct. The scattered walls are not monuments to Rome's glory, but reminders of how completely civilizations can disappear, even when they seem permanent and invincible. Tarraco fell not because it was unimportant, but because the world that sustained it collapsed, and in its ruins, we see the fragility of even the greatest human achievements.